I'm gonna ask questions. Like I'm interested in hearing Dr. David's answers to my questions. I think I need like 1 minute with no interruption until I finish my answers because I'd get distracted.
David likes to interrupt people and be rude, so it's probably going to be difficult.
Go
ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
I don't understand. I didn't understand your sense of humor.
He made a joke about David, but it's okay. Go ahead, Blake. What's your question?
Do you hold the Bible to the same standards as the Quran? So for example, earlier you said that just because a book doesn't have contradiction, it does not mean it is from God. So if not, then how would you figure out if a book is divine? Because listen, I see this a lot, especially on TikTok. For example, yesterday people were talking about the Quran compilation and the authors and whether there's an original manuscript or not. But I don't see the same energy when it comes to your scriptures, like the Bible, basically. And the same thing happens when they're talking about moral stuff, like, for example, slavery and so on. It feels like double standard. So do you actually apply the same standards to the Bible as you do to the Quran and Islam?
As far as the Bible and the Quran, as far as examining a text and saying what is the evidence for it or against it and so on, and determining whether it's a revelation, there you would apply the same standards. The only way you wouldn't apply the same standard is if someone's making a different claim. So just to give you an example here, it's understood in Christianity that there are textual variants in Bible manuscripts, right?
So you don't see a problem with that?
No, I've never seen a Christian who has a problem with the idea that there are textual variants. Textual variants, just like if you have a 1,000, 5,000 or so on people copying a text, whatever that text is, Bible, Quran, Plato's Republic, doesn't matter. Human beings who are copying a text you're going to end up with textual variants. In other words, it can be spelling differences. You can spell words differently and so on. So you'll end up with textual variants. I don't think that's a problem for the Bible. I don't think that's a problem for the Quran. It becomes a problem for the Quran when Muslims spend years arguing perfect dot for dot miraculous preservation of the Quran. And so what we see then is Muslims will make the claim, which they did for years, that there's no textual variants in the manuscripts of the Quran. It's completely false. So what you'll have Muslims going around, our book is different, our book has no textual variants, and then we'll respond by pointing out, no, you've got all kinds of textual variants here. Look at all these textual variants. And then the response will be, you hypocrites, but the Bible has textual variant. Well, we're not saying it's a problem for a book to have textual variants. We're saying it's a problem for what you're saying about your book. You're saying no textual variants in our book, and so we're showing you textual variants. And so there we're applying a standard that's based on a Muslim claim. A Muslim is making the claim that is false, and we're responding to it. So we're not saying, oh, it's a problem for your book to have textual variants. We're saying the fact that there are textual variants exposes your false claim. So there can be situations like that where we're applying a criterion specifically to the Quran that we're not applying to the Bible because we're not the ones making the claim. If a Christian said there are no textual variants anywhere in any manuscript of the Bible, it would be perfectly relevant to refute that claim by saying, but you guys have textual variants. So there are situations where, because Muslims are making a claim about their book that we're not making, we can expose it without saying, it's a problem for us. We don't think it's a problem. We don't think it's a problem for us. We don't think it's a problem for the Quran. We think it's a problem if you're making a false claim. So there are situations like that where we would, where we're raising an objection that we're not applying to the Bible, but it's because of Muslims making certain claims. So with that said, if you're talking about other issues like, let's suppose we point out that there's a moral problem with Muhammad, here is also a very different situation in that Muhammad is claimed to be the ideal pattern of conduct in Islam. It's Surah 33, verse 21. Muhammad is a beautiful pattern of conduct. So he's being set up as a pattern of conduct. So it might look like inconsistency if we say, look, Muhammad has this problem. There's this problem with Muhammad. And we go to the Bible and we see King David committing adultery and then having someone killed. You say, oh, but you're not condemning him. No, we would condemn that, and that is condemned. So David did something wrong, and he's condemned for it. But no one's saying David is this ideal standard of conduct that Christians have to imitate. If it was, if we said King David is this ultimate pattern of conduct that everyone's supposed to imitate, we'd have a serious problem, and it would be completely relevant to say, wait a minute, that guy committed adultery and then had a murder committed to cover it up. So when we're talking about Muhammad and we say Muhammad did this or did that, we're not saying Muhammad can't be a prophet because he did this bad thing. There's a couple reasons we would bring up what Muhammad did. One, for many years, and it still comes up here and there are Muslims who will explain that Muhammad has to be a prophet, and they use what's called the moral argument. They're saying Muhammad's character shows that he's a true prophet. If you're setting this up as the reason to believe in Muhammad, I would reject it, but I would reject the same reasoning if someone used it in the Bible. In other words, if someone said King David's character is so perfect that he has to be from God, I would say you got a problem with that because David did some really messed up stuff. So when Muslims are using an argument, this guy has to be from God because his character is so perfect, then it makes sense to say, but here's a list of things that his character, he's definitely not this ideal moral standard. Look at all these problems. And that's not a situation where you want to say, why aren't you applying that to King David or something like that? Well, no one's making the claim about King David. You're making the claim about Muhammad. So he's in a different situation. It's like the claim that the Quran's been perfectly preserved. You guys are the ones making the claim. Therefore, you guys are the ones we have to actually evaluate that. If we're not making the claim, then it makes no sense to say, oh, and let's apply the same argument to people who aren't making the argument. So as far as morality, yeah, there's all kinds of things in the Bible. I mean, Solomon did all sorts of messed up things. Moses got into trouble. King David. The Bible doesn't view prophets as these infallible beings who never do anything wrong. In Islam, there's a doctrine called Ismat al-Anbiya, which is Allah's protection of the prophets. He's going to protect prophets from committing any sort of major error. And so it's a problem for Islam if a prophet is doing wrong things. It's not a problem for a prophet in the Bible to be doing. We don't have that rule. So that is a rule that is unique to Islam. We don't have the rule. And so we don't need to defend prophets as these sinless or free from major sin or anything like that. We believe that God uses complete misfits and uses people who are, God, even in the New Testament, he takes the Apostle Paul, who started off as a Christian killer, and turns him into an apostle of Jesus. So we just don't have this view. And therefore, it doesn't make sense to apply the same reasoning that we have with Muhammad when we're not the ones making the claims. So that's sort of the general idea between looking at the Bible and the Quran. But what specific issues did you have?
Okay, so if the prophets are not sinless and if the text is not perfectly preserved, then what is your standards to determine if this person is a prophet or not, or if this text is divine or not?
You can have all kinds of things, and some people make arguments based on how, after centuries of people receiving revelations and these people being sometimes on completely different continents, speaking different languages, having completely different status in society and so on. It's basically the Bible has about 40 different authors and so on. So you have people who would argue, hey, here's how you can know it's from God. You've got 40 different authors on 3 different continents, speaking multiple languages and so on. And you put it all together and it's spread out over a 1,400-year period, and then it all fits together. So there are people who would argue along that line, but I'll just tell you my own view as far as why I believe in the Bible and so on. Again, I'm not saying this is how you come to this conclusion. This is how I personally came to believe in the Bible. When I started, and even when I was a Christian, I didn't believe in the inspiration of the text or anything. I believed that the gospel writings are first century records of Jesus. They're people attempting to write first century biographies about Jesus. Okay. And by the way, no scholar is going to disagree with that. So you're dealing with first century documents, accounts of Jesus. Doesn't mean you believe everything in there. I didn't believe everything. I didn't believe everything in there. I believe they were first century records of, and so at that point, I was just treating them like anything else. You got biographies about all kinds of people. These were first century biographies about Jesus. But that means we can learn certain things about Jesus. And when you take what you find in the Gospels and letters of Paul and the early creeds and so on, you have a lot of evidence that Jesus died by crucifixion, so much so that it's not disputed at the scholarly level. We know Jesus died by crucifixion. You also have a lot of evidence that his followers later on were claiming that he had appeared to them risen from the dead. That's not seriously disputed either. You can go to Bart Ehrman, you could go to Gerhard Ludemann, you could go to atheist and agnostic scholars. They don't believe that Jesus rose from the dead, but they're completely convinced that Jesus' followers were claiming that he had appeared to them after rising from the dead. So I was looking at that. We have a ton of evidence that Jesus was dead. We have a ton of evidence that he appeared to his followers later. And then the question is, how do you explain this? And some people try to explain it in terms of, well, maybe they hallucinated or something like that. I was looking at it all and say, wait a minute, you've got this guy, he died. They know how crucifixion works. They know what happens when you get crucified. They were all familiar with how crucifixion works. They know if you're crucified, you're dead. And yet you have multiple people all saying that this one crucifixion victim, out of all the crucifixion victims ever, this one guy actually appeared to people alive afterwards, but not just appeared to them alive, he appeared to them in such a way that it gave them complete confidence that this man had been resurrected. And they were willing to go to their horrible, bloody deaths later, proclaiming that this guy had risen from the dead and appeared to them. So I'm looking at that. I'm telling you that I was in a jail cell, and this is me coming out of atheism, and there are other things involved. But basically, it's okay. If I have a reason to believe that any miracle has occurred, it's the guy who died on the cross and then appeared to people later. So it looks like a miracle. If it looks like a miracle, then it looks like God is doing something with Jesus, and that he is giving a stamp of approval to the message of Jesus. If God is giving a stamp of approval to the message of Jesus, then it makes sense that God is going to make sure that that message is actually conveyed and that it's passed down through writings and so on. And if we have Jesus affirming other prophets as true prophets, I'm going to listen to him, because if I'm going to listen to anyone tell me about prophets or God or the afterlife, I'm going to go with the guy who rose from the dead. So that's how I personally came. That's not how most people would come to believe in the inspiration of Scripture, something like that. That's how I came to believe in the inspiration of Scripture. It's one, just straightforward historical investigation, not even taking the Bible as inerrant or anything like that. Just, okay, these are first century documents. No one's going to dispute that. We can gather information about Jesus and his followers from these first century documents. I believe that you have enough to conclude that a miracle has taken place. If a miracle has taken place, then it looks like God's confirming this guy's message. If God's confirming this guy's message, seems like God is taking this seriously and this is important. Therefore, he's going to make sure that this message is passed down to us. And what do we have of that message? Jesus is affirming the status of these other prophets and these other writings. And so I'm going to take it seriously because it's Jesus. So that methodology, that's not the only methodology. And again, that's not the methodology of most people, but I would gladly apply the exact same reasoning, the exact same standard to Muhammad and ask, what reason do we have to think that Muhammad has God's stamp of approval? What reason? And the problem is every argument that Muslims ever give me is based upon complete nonsense. It's, oh, look at the perfect preservation of the Quran. Look at these scientific miracles. And I examine them and I find out that the evidence they're claiming is not actually there. It was completely different with Christianity. I approached Christianity the exact same way. Oh, you're saying here's a miracle? Let me go and investigate, and there's going to be nothing there. Oh, wait a minute. There is something there. There's a bunch of evidence there. And so I would apply those exact same standards. It's a question of if a guy, it's very simple. If someone is claiming to speak on behalf of God, there are a couple possibilities. Either that person is really speaking for God, he's a real prophet, or he's making it up, or it could be something demonic if you believe in demons and so on. So you've got a couple of different possibilities there. And so you just go through You just go through the evidence and say, what do you actually have evidence for? With Muhammad, I have all kinds of reasons for thinking that he's making it up, either deliberately or not deliberately. You can be making things up in your mind and you still believe it. You've deluded yourself. I have all kinds of reasons for thinking that he's coming up with this stuff from his own mind. I have all kinds of reasons to think that there's something demonic going on here. I've never seen any reason for thinking that it actually comes from God. So I think I'm being consistent in applying that standard.
So you said